there's tension between, as a business investor, what you want to see versus what maybe is coming out of a university that you could fund, or IT transfer from universities, or intellectual property transfer can be very difficult.
One of my most interesting career-limiting move was once in my previous job, when in front of the board of directors, the chairman at the time, this was BDC, asked me, Senia, what can we do to persuade a professor in a large Canadian university to then become the CEO and fund this great company? And I look at him and like, I'm not a missionary. Are you kidding me? I mean, this is really not my job. I mean, we have technology transfer, and in my experience, very rarely the professor has translated, and I know I'm going to offend a lot of people here, but has translated into a great CEO, into the founder, into the chief technology officer, yes. But big companies require a lot of skills that are not necessarily, especially if you hear a little bit scary discussion at the previous panel, when they say, when I do my job by myself and I'm just doing my job and I actually prefer not to show it to anybody for a while. And I'm like, in this cooperative economy where people have to pivot and change, continuously talk, and is this working? No, this is not working, pivot. That is clearly shows that is definitely not CEO material. I'm new to Canada, I've been here 7 years in a sense, but I still cannot count how many technology transfer offices there are between provinces, general. I mean, every time I meet one of them, they make a drawing, they put themselves at the center, and the others are all peripheral, they really don't matter. I'm like, but how is this working? So a bit more of a streamlined, consistent approach would be better.
I've just been sitting here and thinking about Xenia's comments. The plethora of technology transfer officers and whether they are helpful or hurtful. And are you on the hurtful side?
No, I'm on the confused side.
You're on the confused side.
I just would like to have one or two groups that say, okay, this is what we bring you, investor. This is the crop of what we have. In university, this is the cap table. This is how we have incentivized people. The university is going to get a royalty. The professor is going to get a royalty. Here we go.
Okay, so your point is that it's too complex and there's too much variety in the way that intellectual property is treated in the university system. Is that a fair assessment? Because that is one of the big problems that universities face, which is this idea that since we've basically funded, for the most part in universities, the ability of researchers to pursue ideas that in their own bubble, within the confines of their group, it might be, I don't know, cell-to-cell communication, that they've been funded to do work in a particular area. Then how you actually get those ideas out to a broader public, doing something more than just publishing, how does that actually get translated into something that's of interest to the private sector is a huge issue. It's this translation gap, or the gap between basic research and applied research. And I don't think, that is one of the areas where we haven't really figured out what the optimal way of finding mechanisms of interaction. And so one strategy is to have the scientist entrepreneur. The other strategy is to sell off patents. But none of them work with the sort of smoothness that governments would ideally like to see. And of course, they'll never have it be perfect, but it is a real question, which is how do you get across this gap of we're funding ideas, now we want products.
How do you approach that? As someone who's trying to make products.
So when I was not working in a pure private sector, where I clearly need a streamlined machine that comes to me, we were trying to support the creation of accelerators or incubators, but always private sector backed. And let me rephrase it. It doesn't mean that the government shouldn't be there. Government is there sometimes to de-risk it. But if there is no validation, matching of fund from the private sector, then it becomes a non necessarily accountable fashion. So, and just pair them. You don't have to create clusters in a bubble. So you would put them in areas and then open them to the university. Bring us our best, meaning we will have what we call demo days. You can apply, bring us your companies. We just don't want the headache to find out how you're going to compensate yourself. But please, there are 2 or 3 different templates on how you can align interest. The professor and his team and her team will receive 10%, and we can help you doing that. But then again, what is the transfer office doing? If it's not promoting the best companies, and if it's not creating a template to make it simple, what do they do all day? I don't know. That's why it's an area that so far, and if all of you are technology transfer people, my name is Elizabeth. I come from Germany.
Well, at least you got long hair as well.
Or if you can explain it to me, because I'm still lost.
We've talked a lot about innovation coming from universities, but obviously that's not the only place where this comes from. What are other ways you've seen innovation be incubated, or what are different funding models for that outside of the university context? What do we do if we don't want to work with the IT transfer office?
One of the best ways I've seen companies coming to us is they were bootstrapped. People had to feel the pain. They went to family and friends, and this only unfortunately applies to some IT companies. The one that require a significant capex, we need to have a separate discussion about those. And that's when really the government and the universities need to step in, or endowment or foundation need to step in to the risk up to a certain point, the technology risk. But say that the technology is buildable and there is a need whether you fall within the $2 to $3 million US, that you should be able to fundraise from angels and the family and friends community. And usually they would come to that. Some of them, the people are very entrepreneurial. There's some repeat entrepreneurs now finally also happening in Canada. And in that category, I would say companies that would come to us or to my funds, because I'm a bit of a fund of fund, go directly only when companies have a certain level of revenues. And when almost the technology risk is over. So it's a proven something that works.
In the field where I work, there's a movement towards patient groups, both raising funds, defining research questions that they would like answered, and occasionally even trying to move those research results into the healthcare system. And the reason for patient groups to get involved is that they feel that the grant-making system is biased to questions that are really basic research in their focus. And so if, for example, you are somebody who's paralyzed, or somebody in your family is paralyzed, you may not be that interested in research on axonal regeneration, which may take another 10, 20 years before there's any real application in the clinic. You may be much more interested in questions that are almost more innovation in healthcare delivery than in healthcare technology. You might want to know how much time in a day should a person be upright, or how much physical therapy ought they be exposed to, or any number of questions that are really sort of more basic about the day-to-day types of care that a person ought to get. Or some groups actually are interested in funding research in, let's say, pain management in cancer, which they feel is an area that isn't being adequately addressed. And so these groups will raise funds. They will identify researchers. They will sort of set the parameters by which researchers both should be working with one another and the types of outcomes that they expect from the grants that they give. And occasionally they will even identify sort of pathways into the market. So there are alternative both funding sources and ways of thinking about even defining what research questions ought to be addressed.
professor in a large Canadian university to then become the CEO and fund this great company. And I look at him and like, I'm not a missionary. Are you kidding me? I mean, this is really not my job. I mean, we have technology transfer, and in my experience, very rarely the professor has translated. And I know I'm going to offend a lot of people here, but as translated.
Is coming out of a university that you could fund, or IT transfer from universities, or intellectual property transfer can be very difficult.
One of my most interesting career-limiting move was once in my previous job, when in front of the board of directors, the chairman at the time, this was BDC, asked me, Senia, what can we do to persuade the
There's tension between, as a business investor, what you want to see versus what maybe.
And I'm like, in this cooperative economy where people have to pivot, exchange, continuously talk, and is this working? No, this is not working. Pivot. That is clearly shows that is definitely not CEO material. I'm new to Canada, been here 7 years in a sense, but I still cannot let into a great CEO, into the founder, into the chief technology officer, yes. But big companies require a lot of skills that are not necessarily, especially if you hear a little bit scary discussion at the previous panel, when they say, when I do my job by myself and I'm just doing my job and I actually prefer not to show it to anybody for a while.